Recently, I spent some time looking at interviews and advice columns about what it's like to start working in the video game industry. However, there were some questions I had that I couldn't find answers to anywhere. I was lucky enough to sit down with the hiring manager at Obsidian Entertainment, who was kind enough to answer my questions. We had a Q&A session about what it's like to work in the game industry, what hiring managers at game companies look for in potential employees, and general career advice about working in the games industry. If you are thinking about entering the video game industry, I hope you'll find the information in these videos useful.
Hi, my name is Maria Vasilchikova, and I'm currently handling recruiting at Obsidian Entertainment.
How much is a computer science degree valued compared to a portfolio of self-made games? If someone has an associate's in computer science but no games to show, and someone else comes in with no degree but a portfolio of self-made games, which one is more likely to be hired?
Good question. So, an associate's degree is generally never required in this industry. When it comes to portfolio versus a degree, a portfolio will win 99% of the time. However, your portfolio needs to demonstrate exactly what the position is searching for. So, say I have a position that requires something that I'm looking for right now. For example, C++, and then as a bonus, if you know C# and SQL. If your cover letter or resume doesn't demonstrate that you know those things, there's an unlikely chance that we would reach out to you.
As an extension of that question, can someone still be hired if they haven't worked in game design, but have experience programming other kinds of various software? That software being some type of user interface or a picture viewer, etc.
Definitely. Especially when it comes to UI. UI is typically, it's just so much easier to find candidates of UI outside of games, but you can definitely use non-game programming experience towards.
How much is a degree in game design valued? Is a degree in game design considered better, worse, or on par with a degree in computer science?
A programming degree will always be more valued than a game design degree, just because this is something that has become extremely popular over the last few years. Many for-profit universities offering design degrees. Most people who are currently in the industry got in the industry not with one of those degrees, so sometimes those skills aren't transferable. A programming degree, however, a computer science degree, typically reflects more towards a programming role, which is always more sought after. So TLDR, programming or computer science degree, better than a game design degree.
What programming languages are best to learn when it comes to getting a job in the video games industry? How many or which ones are you expected to be familiar with, and are there any that likely won't help you?
So the number one that's going to be most helpful to you is C++, followed by C#. After that, it really gets to be very specific to the particular role that you're doing. As I mentioned before, a position that I'm dealing with right now involves SQL, which is something that more testers deal with. So yeah, C++ was first, great, C# sort of as a secondary.
If an applicant is familiar with a language different from the one the studio is using, for example, the applicant is proficient in Java but the studio is using Python, how much does this affect their chances of getting hired?
Typically, when a position lists certain requirements or language requirements, those are hard requirements, and if they do not know the language at all, it's unlikely that they would get the position or an interview.
How much should a new employee expect to be coached at a studio they were recently hired at? Is it expected for them to have questions on how to program or get certain things to function, or are they expected to know everything they need for the job before getting hired?
So this definitely depends on the level of the position, and this depends on the role that they are playing in their team. So if it's someone who's going to be junior, as managers are definitely going to understand that you're not going to know everything. However, the idea of going through the hiring process is we're making sure to see that the responsibilities and requirements that we have listed on our job description, you've met those, or we think that it's within your grasp. So we're probably not going to give you anything that you can't handle. You are absolutely allowed to ask questions, but it is unlikely that you will end up in a job that you don't know how to do. So
It's pretty common for up-and-coming developers to make 2D games. If they have a portfolio of well-made, quality 2D games, but no or little experience working with 3D, how much does this impact their chances of being hired? How important is it to have experience working on 3D game design?
This is a really big question. So this depends on the job that they're applying for. This depends on the company they're applying for, and this depends. I mean, if you're talking as a whole, 3D is going to be a little bit more relevant than 2D just because there are more 3D games that come out than 2D. That's currently what's popular. But if you're applying for a 3D game and you only have 2D experience, that's not going to be as strong as someone with both. So the best thing you can do is diversify your portfolio and make sure that you have examples of working in 3D, working in 2D. That way that even if you're not particularly strong in either, you show that you can learn and be expanded in that direction.
After a recent Humble Bundle deal, there's a lot of aspiring game devs working with GameMaker. How is an applicant viewed if they've made all of their games in GameMaker? It has its own language and tool set, so if that's all they've ever experienced making games with, how much does it affect their chances of being hired?
So the use of Game Maker or Game Salad or anything like that won't really make or break your candidacy. It is unlikely that a developer would use those tools to make that game. So experience in using that tool itself is not relevant. However, if you can use those tools to demonstrate the skills that are being sought after in the position, say that you can use Game Maker to demonstrate level design or combat systems, then you've got something going there. You're using the tool to demonstrate what you're doing, not necessarily your knowledge in using the tool.
What about other development programs common for indie devs, like Unreal or Unity?
Engine experience is very, very useful. I think that it's, especially since a lot of these programs have student versions that you have access to, Unreal, Unity, super useful. I would say followed by CryEngine. Definitely very useful material to study before trying to get a job.
How much does it help to have experience making games while working in a team? Would having made a game with a team of other people look better than doing a solo project?
So generally, game development is a team sport, so you will be working in a team to get things done. However, working solo demonstrates a high level of skill. So we would see a developer who has made a game from start to finish is very impressive because they have a breadth of programming skills. So experience in working in a team is definitely valuable, but doing solo is also impressive in just the level of skill required to achieve that. So working in a team is very, very important. It's one of the skills that I would say that everyone absolutely must have before getting into the industry.
You often hear stories of brutal game development periods, when people stayed in the office for weeks straight, only leaving to shower or to pick up food for everyone and then head right back. Is this something that generally only happened in the past, or is it still common today?
This still happens today. It really depends on which studio you work at, what kind of deadlines you're facing, what sort of publisher situation you're working under. It really depends. It definitely does still occur, though. Unfortunately, it's really a shame that it still does.
Good to know, though.
How often do people in the games industry work weekends or holidays?
I can't speak to our situation, but in general, I would say weekends occasionally, holidays never. But it really depends on deadlines and project management. Usually that they try to just do a certain amount of time per week that can be spread out over time after the workday or time on the weekend. So.
How long does the hiring process typically take at a major studio? How much time should someone expect it to take between when they submit an application, when they get contacted for or have an interview, and when they get hired?
This can depend on the size of the studio, their HR resources, and the position you're applying for. If you happen to be a candidate that is so perfectly suited for a position, we might reach out to you a short while after you apply. In general, though, sometimes it takes a hiring manager to process multiple resumes that are relevant, or maybe reviewing tests, things like that. So it can take 1 to 3 weeks to reach out, and being hired can vary wildly from 2 weeks to 2 months. And I've heard at larger studios the hiring process or even hearing back at all, take as long as 6-9 months, especially when it comes to interns and smaller roles, just because those things are typically lower priority when it comes to hiring.
How common are paid and unpaid internships in the games industry?
That is an excellent question. I'm proud to say that all of our Obsidian interns are all paid. We do not offer unpaid internships at Obsidian Entertainment. We typically offer 5 to 10 intern positions a year, and our internships are all discipline specific, so they're a natural part in the hierarchy of growth. So you are an intern, and then you grow to eventually be a junior, then maybe a mid-level and senior per ability, of course. So we don't consider interns as separate from our developers. It's a natural part in the progression of growth.
What should people do when they're just starting out, and what should they realistically expect from and aim for in a job? Can you go straight to working on AAA games in a large studio, or should you try to apply to smaller studios first? Should a lot of new game devs expect to work on mobile games before they're able to start working on traditional games?
This really depends on the opportunities around you. Our studio is located in an area that is high concentration of video game studios. So if you're living in an area that has a higher concentration of game studios, there may be more opportunities to work at larger studios. If you're living out in the boonies somewhere, it might be more likely that you'll end up at a mobile studio or any other sort of situation that's not in a main area of industry. I've seen people start out at Naughty Dog. I've seen people start out at smaller mobile studios. It really depends.
A lot of people get into game design with the hope of directing AAA titles one day. Any advice on how to get into this position? Does it make a difference what job you enter the industry in? For example, does someone who programs the physics for a game have a better chance of becoming a director than someone who specializes in character animation?
As a general, and this is not a rule, I've seen the most directors and leads come out of design, programming, or production roles. But as a point of reference, all of our owners at our studio started out in QA. So it's definitely something that you can work towards from the start.
It seems like people used to stay at a single company for a long time and move up within. But in every industry, it's getting increasingly common for people to change what company they work at in order to get a better job or wage. Generally speaking, do you think devs should expect to move up in the company they first get hired at, or should they expect to apply for a better position at another company some years later?
This really depends at the studio you land in. Maybe you'll land at a studio that you're really happy with and you'd like to stay and grow with forever, like myself. Maybe you'll land at a studio where perhaps you're not happy with the wages or the conditions of working. It really depends. Something that I will mention, though, is that some hiring managers do see a lot of bouncing around as a red flag on a resume. So if you see someone who's been in the industry for 5 years, and every single position that they've had has been at a different studio, this could be a red flag for us, just because we want someone who's willing to stay and grow and develop into a valuable asset of our team and our company. And we don't want someone who's just going to leave to try to find something better down the line. So in regard to bouncing around, it can sometimes look bad on resumes, so that is something to think about.
What kind of pay should a person expect from their first job in the games industry?
Your local wage laws and your job market will affect this. As a general, you're looking at $18,000 to $31,000 a year.
Are there certain fields in the games industry that you think are growing faster than others and will have more demand for employment in the future?
Absolutely. Programming as a whole is extremely difficult to find people. The demand for programmers over time has only grown, while the market of people going to school for programming has remained the same. There's a constant growth in programming, and I guess people just don't know about it, but it's highly sought after. There's a lot of specific positions like network programmer, really hard to find. AI programmer, really hard to find. Graphics programmer, really hard to find. These things, more so than others, programming is definitely the highest sought after.
Would you say there's any standard in the video games industry when it comes to health insurance provided by employers? How much should an employee expect their employer to cover? And are things like dental or vision often included?
There is no industry standard for benefits in video games. There's actually not a lot of standards in the video games industry at all, honestly. But this industry does have a disappointing track record of benefits when it comes to contractors, because most states do not require specific benefits for contractors, and game studios will leave that off, essentially. Your local wage laws will affect this.
Finally, is there anything people trying to get into the industry should know about that you don't think they're told often enough? Any other general advice?
Boy, do I. So my initial blurb is always tailor your resume, always write a cover letter. Those are both really